3 people were killed after a man detonated an explosive device in a train station in northern Ukraine as Russia continues to pummel Ukrainian cities.
European leaders in Brussels stopped short of releasing billions of euros in frozen Russian cash to help Ukraine's defense.
U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance criticized a recent vote in Israel's parliament regarding the annexation of the occupied West Bank. The Trump administration has finalized plans to open the coastal plain of Alaska's Arctic National Wildlife Refuge to potential oil and gas drilling.
At least 3 people were killed and more than a dozen others were injured in an explosion at a railway station in the northern Ukrainian city of Ovruch. Local media outlets say a Kharkiv resident detonated an explosive device during a document check, killing a female border guard and 2 civilians. Ukraine's State Border Guard Service said the bomber later died in an ambulance. Police are on the scene of the incident and are investigating the causes and motivations behind the attack. Meanwhile, at least 8 people were injured in Kharkiv after Russian forces carried out an aerial raid of the city on Friday. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, in a meeting with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, accused Putin of being insincere in his expressed willingness to end the war.
Putin doesn't show that he wants to stop the war, and he really began steps and pushing us to such humanitarian disaster. What he wants to organize this winter is, of course, with attacks on energy, on gas, on water supplies. It's understandable what to do.
3 more Ukrainians were killed on Friday in separate Russian attacks on the southern Kherson region. Close to 24 others, including children, were also injured in the strikes which targeted residential buildings. Officials in Sumy also reported strikes in the region overnight into Friday. There were no casualties in those strikes, but first response teams say the incursion of drones and missiles caused damage to properties and civilian infrastructure.
EU leaders failed to agree on a way forward on using frozen Russian assets based in Belgium as a way of funding Ukraine over the next 2 years. The European Commission and EU leaders say the money should be transferred to Ukraine to pay for weapons and for their budgetary expenses as they defend themselves against the Russian invasion. But the Belgian government says there are too many risks for their financial sector, including potential heavy legal costs for it to proceed with the so-called reparations loan.
This is a topic that is certainly not trivial. It's very complex, and therefore we discussed it, but it was also very clear that there are points to be clarified and to have a deep dive and to work more on them. So in other words, we agreed on the what, that is the reparations loan, and we have to work on the how.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed leaders earlier in the day, welcoming the passing of the 19th package of sanctions targeting Russian energy giants and promising to bring forward a complete end to the use of Russian fossil fuels in Europe. Zelensky says his country needed the money from the reparations loan from Russian assets to produce weapons.
We need to use any kind of Russian money for Ukrainian production and increase it. It's cheaper and quicker. And we speak, first of all, about long range. It's about drones. It's about electronic warfare, systems of electronic warfare, and it's about missiles. If Russia is ready to speak, we're ready to speak. This is the plan between us. The plan begins from ceasefire. The plan begins even not with ceasefire. The plan begins with will to sit and speak, not to stand and fight using, all the kind of missiles against just civilians.
EU leaders have agreed that a decision on using frozen Russian assets held in Belgian banks to be used in Ukraine will be made at the next EU summit in December. It's also possible that other countries outside the EU, like the UK or Canada, could participate. But for now, the European Commission is tasked with addressing and coming up with solutions for Belgium's very strongly held objections. Shona Murray, Euronews, Brussels.
Rival political parties in Hungary have both treated the anniversary of the 1956 revolution in Budapest as an opportunity to demonstrate mass support. Prime Minister Viktor Orbán brought tens of thousands to the street and said the upcoming elections will be a choice between a war led by Brussels or peace under his leadership.
Brüsszel úgy döntött, háborúba megy. A háborúpárti országok már létrehozták a háború szövetséget. Utánozhatatlan eleganciával a hajlandók koalíciójának nevezik. Hajlandóak elküldeni másokat meghalni.
Orbán's rival, Péter Magyar, leader of the Tisza party, equally drew tens of thousands of people to his own march and drew parallels between pro-Russian Orbán and the puppet government installed by the Soviet Union after the revolution.
Magyar emberek sorsáról nem dönthetnek Brüsszelben, de Washingtonban és Moszkvában sem. A történelmet magyar emberek írják, magyar emberek a magyar tereken és a magyar utcákban, amikor a félelem helyett a reményt választják, és egymásba kapaszkodva elindulnak.
Hungary is already in full campaign mode 6 months before the upcoming elections, with Viktor Orbán and Fidesz on the defensive against a rival coming from his own party, who has united the multicolored opposition sympathizers in one center-right party.
Upon his departure from a trip to Israel, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance criticized a recent vote in Israel's parliament regarding the annexation of the occupied West Bank, saying it goes against the Trump administration's position.
It was purely symbolic. I mean, look, if it was a political stunt, it was a very stupid political stunt, and I personally take some insult to it. The West Bank is not going to be annexed by Israel. The policy of the Trump administration is that the West Bank will not be annexed by Israel. That will continue to be our policy. And if people want to take symbolic votes, they can do that. But we certainly weren't happy about it.
Lawmakers narrowly passed the vote on Wednesday, sparking widespread international condemnation. Imposing Israeli sovereignty on the occupied West Bank would violate international law. Prime Minister Netanyahu's Likud party dismissed the vote as a political stunt from the opposition. While many members of Netanyahu's coalition support annexation, most have backed off those calls since U.S. President Donald Trump said last month that he opposes the move. But while the bill was proposed by the far-right opposition party Noam, hardliners from Netanyahu's coalition, including one member of his own Likud party, helped the vote to a majority. U.S. President Donald Trump announced he is ending trade talks with Canada because of an anti-tariffs television ad he said misstated facts. In a post on his social media site Truth Social, Trump said the advert featuring Ronald Reagan speaking negatively about tariffs was fake, calling it egregious behavior. It comes after Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney said he aims to double his country's exports to other countries because of the threat imposed by Trump's tariffs. Trump's call for an abrupt end to negotiations could further inflame trade tensions between the neighboring countries, which had already been building for months. Carney met with Trump earlier this month to try to ease trade tensions, as the two countries and Mexico prepare for a review of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. The Trump administration has finalized plans to open the coastal plain of Alaska's Arctic National Wildlife Refuge to potential oil and gas drilling. Trump's bill of tax breaks and spending cuts passed during the summer called for at least 4 lease sales within the refuge over a 10-year period. The decision has renewed a long-simmering debate over whether to drill in one of the nation's environmental jewels. Leaders and indigenous Gwich'in communities near the refuge consider the coastal plain sacred, noting its importance to a caribou herd they rely upon, and they oppose drilling there. Leaders of Kaktovik, another indigenous community within the refuge, support drilling and consider responsible oil development to be key to their region's economic well-being.
and these are the songs that he wants to work on right now.
Trying to find some real in all the noise.
You always do.
We find him in this film when he's coming off the River Tour, and he can very easily continue that trajectory of selling out arenas and having hit songs. But instead, he chose silence, a 4-track recorder, and the courage to look inward. And that choice gave us Nebraska.
I did what I did, sir, I guess it's just a meanness in this world.
I've spoken before. I haven't sang a whole lot, but I understand the concept of singing. You know, I've been a fan of music and singers, but the guitar, I remember holding it in my hands for the first time and trying to wrap my fingers around the right strings for the chords, and it just feeling like completely alien to me.
Bruce is a relief in what he's doing with this album.